Hey guys, as we wind down tonight, we gently slip into a world with no packaged snacks, no midnight pizza, and nothing crunchy except the sound of your own teeth cracking as you try to bite into a 3-week-old dry loaf of bread. Welcome to the Middle Ages, a time when the concept of junk food didn't exactly not exist. It just usually came off the floor, was found behind the chicken coop, and sometimes had legs. You're lying on a damp straw mattress, listening to the wind whistle through the thatched roof like it's trying to whisper best-forgotten secrets of medieval cuisine. Your stomach growls like the softest choir from hell. You crave something. Just a bit of bread, a piece of candy, a milkshake, or at least something that could legally be defined as edible without needing an exorcism. But this is the 14th century. And you're living in a world where the word calories hasn't been invented yet, but the word exhaustion is carved into every doorstep in town. Maybe you're imagining medieval junk food as cute little pies wrapped in rough paper and sold by kind old women on village roads. No, those pies exist in poetry. In real life, junk food is whatever hadn't already been stolen, wasn't too rancid, and didn't move too fast to catch. A piece of cheese dropped under the table could be treasure. A leftover lump of pork fat from a noble feast. A miracle. An apple with a worm? Just an apple with extra protein. You probably won't survive this story, but you will chuckle. Maybe out of despair, maybe because it's the only way to deal with the fact that medieval snacks often came with diarrhea, hallucinations, and occasionally, a visit to the priest to repent for thy gustatory greed. So before you tuck yourself in like a turnip in storage, let me take you on a strange, humorous, and occasionally tear-stinging journey through the world of medieval snacking, where you didn't eat because you were hungry, you ate because there were no better options. So, before you settle in, feel free to give the video a like and hit subscribe if you're truly enjoying the journey. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, especially if you're sneaking this in as your bedtime snack. Now, soften the glow, set a gentle breeze in motion, and let's drift into tonight's tale together. You open your eyes sometime between midnight and dawn. It's hard to tell when the candle has long gone out, and the rooster still hasn't decided if it's worth crowing today. And you feel it. A soft sound, not from outside your straw hut, but from deep within your gut, where your modern dreams of burgers and fries have decayed into a single noise, your stomach howling like a Catholic on Friday with no fish, and you realize you're hungry. Not time for a proper meal hungry, but the kind of hungry where you'd consider eating your own shadow if it smelled like salt. You spring up from your straw mattress, which clings to your back like a living creature, and begin what may be the strangest journey a medieval human can embark upon in the dead of night, the quest for a snack. Of course, they didn't call it that. They called it survival, or foraging in someone else's kitchen while no one's looking. Let's face it, no refrigerator, no cupboards, no mom's homemade cookies, and absolutely nothing wrapped in plastic that crinkles like the devil's laughter. What you do have is a suspicious-smelling corner of the floor, and a pot containing what used to be soup 3 days ago, now a trembling gelatinous blob, like the soul of someone who stole communion wafers. You shuffle toward it. Your eyes haven't adjusted to the dark yet. Your foot lands on something soft. It might be a turnip. It might be a hibernating rat. You apologize, even though it can't hear, and move on. Somewhere in your memory, you vaguely recall an era when the word snack meant chocolate-covered almonds, warm tarts fresh from the oven, or at least a pack of gummy bears. Here, a snack is anything that hasn't spoiled enough to run away. You lift the lid. A smell hits you, pungent and damp, as if someone boiled vegetables and then forgot about them for 2 full moon cycles. But you have no choice. You touch the trembling surface. It feels like your distant aunt's kneecap, and scoop up a spoonful. A voice inside whispers, "This is a mistake." But you know there will be many more mistakes tonight, and at least this one is edible. You chew, slowly, like you're rhythmically punishing yourself. The flavor, somewhere between old vegetable broth and questionable well water, makes your tongue quietly wonder if it's allowed to take sick leave. But strangely enough, by the 3rd bite, it doesn't taste terrible anymore. Maybe you've adapted. Maybe despair tastes like stale turnip. That's the thing about medieval snacks. They're equal parts pitiful and so darkly funny it hurts. They're not meant to delight your palate. They weren't created to be enjoyed. They exist simply to remind you that you are, in fact, still alive. That amid the cold, the hunger, and the snoring that sounds suspiciously like moaning from the old man in the corner, you can still chew something and not die instantly. And by the standards of the time, that's a win. If you're a modern person thrown back here, and let's be honest, that's the role you're playing, this is the moment you learn a hard truth. Craving is a dangerous emotion. It creates expectation. And expectation, in this era, mostly leads to disappointment and poor digestion. You start to dream. Maybe tomorrow, at the market, you'll find an old donut fried in reused lard, or an apple that isn't completely mush. Maybe the fishmonger will pity you and throw you a half-burnt dried fish. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll find something that isn't already moldy. Dreaming is magic. And it's also how a medieval person knows they haven't been completely broken by reality. You lick the spoon, place the pot back in its corner, and return to your straw mattress. Your stomach no longer screams. It just whimpers, like a drum with a tear in the hide. But at least, it's quiet. You curl up again, your blanket still that old cloak that smells of smoke, and you think, if this is what passed for a snack back then, it's no wonder people went to church so much. They needed hope. And anti-diarrheals. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Maybe you'll find a piece of cheese that's slightly less hard than limestone. Maybe you won't get food poisoning. Maybe. But then you chuckle softly. Not out of joy, but because you just heard a rat scurry past, and it has plans. You wake up with a mouth as dry as a sun-bleached beehive, a stomach that feels like a worm is singing opera in your intestines, and a soul that has temporarily left your body to search for a croissant. But no matter. You still have one sliver of hope, a piece of dark bread. The classic, ancient, eternal breakfast, literally. Medieval bread wasn't baked to be eaten. It was baked to survive through moon cycles, festivals, droughts, wars, plagues, and, on occasion, you. Taking a bite wasn't a culinary act. It was a contract, a negotiation between your teeth and a whetstone. You eye the loaf on the table. It doesn't look back. It doesn't have to. It knows you have no other options. It's the final remnant from the last time you received provisions. That is, when an old village woman threw it at you and muttered, "Eat this if you must." Since then it has hardened. Not in the crispy and delightful way, but in the drop it and someone will call the guards because they thought a brick shattered way. You try to break it. It doesn't break. It makes a dull thunk and rattles the soup bowl beside it. You adjust your strategy. Use a knife. The old bent knife, its tip curved like your college love story, tries to saw off a slice. The blade groans softly, as if apologizing for what it's about to do. Finally, after considerable effort and possibly a drop of blood, origin unknown, you succeed. You have a slice, thick, tough, edged like a weapon. You could use it to carve a turnip, but no, you're going to eat it. You raise the slice to your mouth with the reverence of someone fully aware they're about to do something stupid. You bite. Instantly your jawbone files for leave. Your front teeth emit a soft click, a final whisper before they consider a career change in carpentry. You chew. Or rather, you attempt a movement that resembles chewing. The bread doesn't soften. It resists like a crow being wrongly accused. And the taste? A complicated blend of dry mold, aged bran, and the faint memory of the millstone that crushed it. A hint of ash. A whisper of something unidentifiable but deeply emotional. It feels like eating a story, not the kind you want to tell. There are rumors that bread back then was mixed with sand to increase its weight. You're not sure if that's true, but the gritty sensation between your molars feels incredibly real. Eating bread is like polishing your teeth with sandpaper. Every chew a step closer to the dentist, if such a person existed and didn't demand payment in chickens. You try dipping it into stale beer to soften it. It soaks it up like a sad sponge. Now you have beer bread, not better, just wetter. Like biting into a shoe that's been rained on and fermented since last fall. The sour beer brings back memories of accidentally drinking vegetable washing water, and your tongue begins to shrink in self-defense. And still, you eat. Not because it tastes good, but because of the rule. A hungry person will eat anything, even a loaf's mistake. There are better days. Occasionally, you're blessed with fresh bread, warm, fragrant, actually made of wheat. But most days, all you have is geological loaf. You can sit on it, you can throw it. And, if you're brave enough, you can eat it. You know there are others in the village who don't eat bread. They survive on thin gruel, turnips, or plain old hunger. But you have bread. And that, by medieval standards, is either a blessing or a curse. Hard to say. You set down the last bite. Your teeth are wobbly. Your eyes sting. Not sure if from emotions or dry coughing. And you think, maybe tomorrow I'll try eating the wooden spoon. At least it doesn't have mold. You're thirsty. Not mildly thirsty, like, oh, a lemonade would be nice. But the kind of thirsty where your throat feels like a cracked cave where the god of wind has moved in to rehearse arias with sandpaper. You need a drink. Something wet, swallowable, and unlikely to ignite you from the inside. Sounds simple, but you've forgotten. This is the 14th century, where every liquid is a trial by judgment. You think of water, clearly the first choice, right? Then you remember, the water in your village doesn't go through reverse osmosis. It filters through time, rainfall, and livestock manure. Well water can be clean, if you dig deep enough, but you might also dredge up the ghost of someone who once vomited into it. Rainwater sounds romantic until it passes through 3 layers of thatch, 1 rat's nest, and several traumatic memories. By then, it tastes like poor life choices. So you go with the more popular option, beer. Medieval beer isn't like the stuff you drink under warm fairy lights in a bar playing sad indie music. Back then, beer was brewed in wooden barrels, by hand, by faith, and by microorganisms no one dared name. It was cloudy, lukewarm, faintly alcoholic, and always came with some kind of floaty. Maybe a bug, maybe the unfinished ambitions of the last brewer. And the charming part? Even kids drank it. Not for lifestyle reasons, but because clean water was the kind of thing you only believed in if you enjoyed hallucinations. Beer, while not clean, had been boiled, fermented, and had at least murdered a few bacteria along the way. It was the only liquid you could drink without needing to update your will. You lift the jug of beer. Its lid is sealed with damp linen and the traditional scent of mildew. You pour into a wooden cup and watch the thin foam spread like an oil slick on a dead fish pond. The smell hits your nose, strong, slightly sour, a medley of barley husks, yeast, and unnamed sadness. You take a sip. It's warm. Of course it's warm. There's no fridge, and the jug's been sunbathing all morning like a turtle that forgot to retreat. The feeling? Hard to describe. Not quite tasty, not quite terrible. More like being slapped with a plank soaked in fermented oats. You feel cool, then hot, then vaguely aware of barley vapor rising to your brain whispering, well, at least it's not water. What about wine? Sure, that's an option. But not the elegant red kind in thin glass goblets. Medieval wine was harsh, fiery, and made from anything that could ferment. Wild apples, overripe pears, sour plums, and sometimes pond water diluted honey. Each sip was a journey from your throat to your gut, along which you'd temporarily lose your sense of smell, trust in humanity, and possibly your vision for a few minutes. Some villagers brewed mead, honey wine, which sounds appealing until you learn they stirred it with their hands, unwashed, and occasionally added folk medicine, like bark, hay, or things better suited to insect repellent, but you drink it anyway, because you're thirsty. And after living this long in a place where even your sweat might ferment, you understand that standards are flexible. You've tried milk, but milk doesn't come from supermarkets here. It comes from a weary cow, hand-milked by someone who only imagined washing their hands. If it's not already sour, it's halfway to becoming something else. Maybe cheese, maybe a new life form. You take a sip, then set the cup down carefully, trying not to let your tongue leap out of your mouth in protest. In short, every drink is a gamble. It might keep you alive. It might change how you live, like spending 3 days flat on your back dreaming of mermaids singing on turnip hills. But you drink. Because thirst. Because your tongue is starting to crack like untended farmland. Because your throat feels like sandpaper dragged across the Sahara. You lift your head, wipe your mouth on a flour-stained sleeve, and exhale. You're still alive. You drank. You don't know if it was the right choice. But at least it went down, and in a world where food breaks teeth and water threatens dysentery, that's a win. You're sitting under an apple tree, not to enjoy a picturesque afternoon with dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves and a gentle breeze brushing your cheek, but to stake out, to watch which fruit is about to fall, to check if anyone's looking, to consider whether today is the day you'll get caught and beaten with a shovel for stealing a wrinkled pear of unknown vintage. Fruit, in the Middle Ages, wasn't dessert. It was a symbol of power, luck, and occasionally the reason you had to confess on Sunday morning. In your mind, fruit was once a simple thing, something you bought at a grocery store, rinsed under tap water, and bit into without wondering who had licked it first. But here, every ripe fruit is temptation, and every bite is a promise to compromise the shaky morals you've been trying to maintain. You see it. An apple, dangling like the gaze of God when you lie to a priest. It's red, ripe, and possibly intact. No worms, no cracks, no bird pecks. A marvel, a miracle, an accident waiting to happen. You reach out, slowly, like you're defusing a bomb. Your other hand balances on the tree root rising from the ground like the spine of a sleeping earth dragon. The wind stops. Your heart stops. You stop breathing, and you pluck. No alarm, no lightning bolt from above. No dog leaps from those bushes to protect the Lord's agricultural property. You exhale, and then you run. Not fast. You're not a professional criminal. You run like someone who hasn't eaten since morning, panting and trying to hide the apple in your sleeve as if it were contraband from a coven of witches. You duck behind the chicken coop, where the stench is strong enough to throw off any tracker, and you bite. The crunch is sharp, loud, like a firecracker at a blind man's banquet. Apple juice trickles down, sweet, a little sour, and cool. Cool like the kiss of a scythe beckoning from behind. You close your eyes. This is paradise. Not because it's the best thing you've ever tasted, but because it's not moldy bread. And in a world where every meal is a gamble between mild poisoning and actual death, a normal apple is a reason to feel alive. But the joy lasts exactly 4 bites. On the 5th, you find a worm, plump, white, and content, like a minor noble on a feast day. It's sleeping, inside the apple, in your mouth. You stop. You look at the worm. The worm looks at you. Both sides feel violated. You spit, not out of disgust, but from surprise. Then you look at the remaining half of the apple. You know the worm only took part of it. There's still apple left, and you're still hungry. So you keep eating. You just change tactics. Bite from the other side. That's how medieval people deal with problems. They ignore them and keep chewing. Of course, fruit isn't always easy to come by. The good stuff, grapes, pears, berries, plump figs, tends to be behind the wooden fences of churches, monasteries, or noble estates. Which means, if you want it, you have to climb the fence, slip through thorns, dodge the dog, avoid the garden warden, and pretend to be blind when someone yells, "Who picked this?" All that for 3 unripe plums and a lifetime of side-eye from your neighbors. Once you stole a strawberry from an old nun's garden. You didn't know it was her garden. You just saw the berry, and you got caught. She didn't scold you. She just looked at you, with the eyes of someone who had seen hell and come back solely to witness your shame. You returned the strawberry, and from that day on, you never touched strawberries again. Not out of fear, but because you couldn't bear to see those eyes again. Sometimes you get lucky. Someone hands you a small pear, slightly bruised on one side but still fresh. You thank them, cherish it like a divine gift from gods with rustic palates. You bring it home, place it on the table, sit and admire it in the evening light, and think, "I'll save it for tomorrow morning." The next morning, the rat eats it. And you learn the second lesson. Fruit isn't just fleeting. It's a test of morals, patience, and property management. Medieval fruit is everything you want but shouldn't have. It's sweet but tinged with the bitterness of danger. It's refreshing but comes from places you aren't allowed to enter. It's reward, punishment, and the whisper of a better life. If you're reckless enough or foolish enough to take a bite. You found it on a weary afternoon when the sun leaned sideways as if apologizing for shining too hard. and you were so hungry you began to seriously consider eating a wooden spoon, mostly because it smelled faintly of wood. There it was, a piece of cheese, not large, not pretty, and certainly not fresh. But it had shape, it had color, and most importantly, it wasn't bread. Medieval cheese wasn't food. It was a spiritual challenge. No one really knew what it was made of. Officially, it came from fermented milk. But what happened between milking the cow and cutting the cheese lay beyond the reach of both science and poetry. Some claimed every piece of cheese carried the personality of its maker, which sounds romantic, until you take a bite and realize that personality is vindictive and mold positive. You pick it up. It's damp, soft where it shouldn't be, hard where it should melt. A patch of blue mold is spreading across it like a growing empire of bacteria. But you know, in this world, if something hasn't walked off the table on its own, it's technically still edible. The aroma rising from the cheese is a strange harmony of mature cow sweat, November mud, and an unspoken sorrow that's never had a name. You take a deep breath, not to enjoy it, but to check whether your lungs are strong enough. Then you bite. Your brain reacts instantly, not in words, through memories. You recall every poor decision you've ever made, from climbing banana trees at age 7 to licking a frozen pole in winter. The cheese doesn't just have a taste, it has an attitude. It doesn't invite you to eat, it dares you. And you, armed with the pride of someone who once burned a turnip and still ate it, you accept. The first flavor is salt, not charming poem salt, but the kind that tastes like the tears of a guard who just lost his payroll. Then sourness, then bitterness, then a vague greasiness, like licking a wall painted with lard 2 harvests ago. Somewhere in between is the scent of rotting wood, old shoes, or a town hall meeting where no one brushed their teeth. You swallow, not because you want to, but because your tongue has gone numb and can't find the emergency exit. As the cheese slides down your throat, you feel something strange, like you've just learned a lesson about existence. You're not sure what it is. Maybe it's always sniff before biting, or sometimes food is a form of exorcism. But you know you've changed. Part of you has been purified. The rest is currently negotiating with your stomach. Some say cheese is the white gold of the countryside, but the piece you just ate feels more like fake gold lost in a swamp, found by someone too hungry to care about divine judgment or digestion. The elders in the village love cheese. They call it the food of memory. Maybe because it reminds them of when they still had teeth. Or maybe because after eating it, they must sit in silence and reflect on the past to forget the present. Children aren't allowed to eat it. Not because it's poisonous, because they're too young to understand its complexity. Also, one child once bit into a maggot-filled piece and started preaching like a prophet. Occasionally, if you're lucky, or well acquainted with the cheesemaker, you'll get a fresh piece. Fresh meaning less moldy, or just recently transitioned from liquid to solid without entering a full mental breakdown. That kind is still hard to eat, but at least it doesn't attack you in the first bite. Cheese wasn't just food, it was a psychological test. It asked, do you really want to live? How strong is your stomach? Do you remember what joy used to feel like? You cut another piece, for reasons you can't explain. Maybe curiosity, maybe pride. Maybe you're experiencing a mild addiction to the bitter aftertaste of existence, a phenomenon only triggered by eating something both foul and emotionally destabilizing. You chew. This time it's better. Maybe your tongue has surrendered. Maybe your soul has departed. Either way, you feel peace, like you've completed an ancient ritual proving you belong to this land, to this poverty, to this smell. And when you put the knife down, lean your head back, and exhale, not from fullness, but from survival. You sense something, almost like enlightenment. Not the Zen kind, the, I just ate that, and I'm still alive, maybe I should write poetry kind. You start your morning by waking slowly, very slowly, as if bargaining with your straw blanket for 5 more minutes of life. But when hunger begins to slither up your belly like a blind snake looking for a way out, you're forced to stand. Not out of motivation, but because you'd rather not die in a forgettable pose. And in that hazy moment between sleep and consciousness, Between the ash-covered hearth and the chicken coop, between reality and stomach injury, you remember, today is Black Market Day. The black market, not the kind with blood diamonds and dramatic documentaries, but the kind where desperate people sell things too salty, too greasy, too strange, or too shameful to be allowed at the main market. Where fried fat meets deep regret. Where roast rat looks directly into your soul. Where everything has a price, except morality. You take the dirt path behind the church, where grass leans like it's trying to cover a crime, where horse dung reunites with old friends, and where the air tastes like stale oil and vague threats. The stalls sprout from the ground like poisonous mushrooms after a storm. Makeshift tents patched with burlap, rope, and in some cases, old undergarments. You enter and the atmosphere changes instantly. Not thick with smoke or dust, but with smell. The smell of fat. Pork fat, beef fat, unidentifiable fat, blending with burnt onions, flour cakes rolled in dirt, and the silent agreement of non-existent authorities. Heat rises from iron pans blackened like the moon after frying a meteorite. The sizzling sound whispers like the devil preparing appetizers. The first stall belongs to an old woman named Hilda. She doesn't speak much. She just looks at you with the eyes of someone who once swallowed a whole sparrow on a bet. She sells fried onion cakes, origin of the onions unknown, flour of mysterious ancestry, each cake shaped like clouds caught in a thunderstorm. You buy one. It's hot, soft on the outside, hard in the middle, and when you bite into it, oil splashes your chin like a disciplinary kiss. You don't scream. Hilda doesn't care. No one else does. Everyone is fighting in silence, against grease, heat, and the thin hope that today is not food poisoning day. Farther in, you meet a man selling meat, which, according to him, is mountain rat. But judging by the shape, it could be anything that once had fur and knew how to run. He smiles. You don't. But you still buy it. Not because you trust him, but because it's the only thing not dripping oil, just leaking mystery juice. The meat is skewered on a wooden stick, grilled to a charred crisp like the dream of someone who's never seen actual meat. You take a bite. It tastes like meat, but also a bit like leather soaked in fish sauce. Chewable, swallowable. The only problem is the rat's eyes. Still there, in your memory, gleaming as if to whisper, "You think you've won?" Next stall. A young man with uneven stubble frying mushroom cakes. They bubble black at the edges, with a crust like soft iron and a center as runny as adolescent emotions. You ask, "Are these mushrooms poisonous?" He looks at you, chuckles, and says, "You'll know if you live." You bite. Fragrant, fatty, slightly spicy. Then your mouth starts to go numb. Not allergy numb, more like your brain switching to telepathic mode with a turnip. You sit on a nearby rock, watch sunlight flicker, and think, maybe you've reached another layer of reality, where snacks are portals to the subconscious. In the market's corner, a woman sells honey cakes, small as a cat's paw, fried in oil that's been reused who knows how many times, then coated in honey thick enough to glue a stone statue. The cake is sweet, very sweet. Sweet enough to make your teeth feel like they're contemplating resignation. But it's sweet. And in a world where every dish tastes of despair, even sweetness, whether fermented or dishonest, is enough to make you smile. A little. Just a little. One thing becomes clear after you walk the whole market. Nothing here is truly delicious, but everything is real. Real enough that you glance back at your stomach like it's a side character who just endured a confusing act of tragedy. The food here isn't certified. It's not sanitary. It's not endorsed by any known religion. But it makes you feel. Because it hurts. Because it burns. Because it blisters your lips and confuses your brain. And because despite everything, you'll come back next week when the market returns. You leave the market with a full belly, a woozy head, and a mouth tasting like wood ash mixed with memory. But you're content, not laugh out loud happy. Quietly happy, like seeing a cat survive falling off the roof 3 times. You survived, you ate, and you didn't die. That's a miracle. That's the Middle Ages. You're sitting in a kitchen that doesn't have a kitchen. Just a dim shaft of light sneaking through a crack in the wooden wall, falling across a table coated with a fine layer of dust, like the ashes of meals that died last week. And you're hungry. Of course you're hungry. That's the default state of medieval life. Like waking up to find your teeth loose, or your trousers mysteriously nibbled by rats. You crave something. Round, gentle, high in protein, and low in emotional damage. Something you can hold in your hand, crack into a bowl, fry in silence like someone who still has the right to dream. And then you think of eggs. There's no food more full of hope than an egg. A small, fragile, glossy object that seems like a symbol of new beginnings. But in the Middle Ages, it could also symbolize disaster. No one's ever quite sure whether the egg in your hand is a gift from a hen or a practical joke from God. It might be fresh, it might be cooked. It might also be pursuing a career of its own inside. You found the egg in the rafters, nestled in a straw basket your neighbor asked you to keep an eye on, which, in this world, often means take it home and eat it if nobody notices. It's small, slightly yellowed, with faint cracks that look like warnings written in pidgin dialect. You pick it up, as gently as if holding your future. You shake it. Nothing. Not great. Fresh egg slosh. Bad eggs are silent. Fermented eggs hum with memories. But you're not educated enough to tell the difference, so you decide to boil it. Your stove is an old stone pit, filled with damp coal and despair. Your pot used to be a soldier's iron helmet. He retired after a bee stung him in the tongue. The water takes 2 hours to boil, during which you burn wood, fan the flames, curse the laws of thermodynamics, and wait. You watch the egg, the pot, your hands, the egg again. It lies there like a monk who fell asleep during prayer, completely unbothered. At last the water boils. You drop the egg in. There's a soft pop. No one's sure if it's the shell cracking or a soul quietly exiting the protein chamber. You put the lid on, not to hold the heat, but to contain your fragile hope. 15 minutes later, you take it out. The shell's a little cracked. Your hand's a little shaky. Your stomach's making noises like an off-key brass band. You tap the shell, slowly, carefully, and the first scent hits you like a breeze infused with the consequences of 3 unrepentant lifetimes. You pause. You don't panic. You simply tilt your head, philosopher style, pondering the purpose of egg-based existence. The egg white has changed color. Not white, and not exactly white adjacent. It's gray, semi-gelatinous, and trembles like pudding waiting for the apocalypse. The yolk? No longer a yolk. It's some neutral substance, between solid and gas, with a sad brown hue, like a sock lost in swamp water. You look around. No witnesses, no judgment. Just you, the egg, and the smell. A smell that doesn't scream rotten, but strongly suggests it could convince mice to relocate. You could toss it, but you don't. You lit the coals. You waited for the water. You've poured your entire morning into this egg project, and you will eat it, out of pride, out of defiance, because you refuse to be defeated by a faceless pigeon egg. You take a bite. The texture is soft, chewy, but also oddly clingy, like the memory of an ex. The taste? It's like biting into an unanswered question, or a love letter written in rainwater. But you swallow, not because it's good, but because this is a ritual. And that's when you realize, the egg isn't food, it's a test, a philosophical trap. A message from the universe that says, not everything round can be trusted. You once heard tales of noblemen eating boiled duck eggs soaked in herbs, eggs perfumed with flowers, boiled in spring water from enchanted valleys. You imagine tasting that. Then you glance at the thing in your bowl, quivering like a wounded spirit, and accept that you are still very far from that dream. And yet, there's something tender here. Amid all the strangeness, the smell, the questionable texture, this egg is real. It's part of a day survived, a fragment of an era without many choices. A reminder that sometimes you don't need something delicious. You just need something to make you feel a little less empty. even for one spoonful. You exhale. Your chest feels lighter, or it could be mild food poisoning. You're not sure. But you're still alive, and in its own peculiar way, the egg has fulfilled its destiny. You have a rotten tooth, not the kind discovered by a dentist in a pristine room with soft jazz and kind white lighting, but the medieval kind, where there are no dentists, no anesthesia, and no tools other than a rusty clamp and a mentally unstable blacksmith who once studied anatomy on pigs. That tooth, once your loyal companion through dozens of rock-hard loaves and emotionally void steamed turnips, is now aching. Aching like there's a tiny soul inside tapping to be let out. You sit there, hand on cheek, thinking of the past, of the future, of the choices that brought you to this exact suffering. And then, in a moment of weakness, you remember candy. Candy. Just thinking the word makes your tongue salivate like a dog spotting a bone, while your rotten tooth tolls like a funeral bell whispering, "Try me. I dare you." But you still dream. Because candy is the symbol of joy, of sweetness, of childhoods that never happened. And in the Middle Ages, it's also a symbol of luxury, moral decay, and revolutionary-level tooth decay. You've heard rumors, someone sells candy at the big market. Not the black market, but the one where nobles pass by pretending to be busy, and peasants pass by to inhale roasted meat smells they can't afford. In a corner, behind the duck feather stall and near the suspiciously expired baking powder, is an old woman named Greta, rumored to possess a secret recipe for honey candy, the very kind that once made a knight break his vow of asceticism. You find her. Greta isn't the sweet fairy tale kind of old. She's the "I survived 3 famines and 1 fire caused by candle and lard" kind of old. She doesn't smile, doesn't greet. She just pulls from her cloth pouch a single candy, shapeless, wrapped in aged parchment with chicken feathers stuck to it. You ask, "Is there sugar in this?" She replies, "There is, if you believe." You ask, "How much?" She says, "1 coin, or 1 promise. But the promise must be bitter." You hand her the coin. You don't mess with poetic contracts. The candy is handed to you like contraband, small, sticky, and capable of inspiring deep regret. You unwrap it. The scent of honey mixed with grease rises, blending with the smell of your own hands. A nuanced bouquet of straw, salt, and existential disappointment. The candy clings to your fingers like it has emotional needs. You bring it to your mouth. You bite. The first crunch reminds you that some decisions, once made, cannot be undone. The candy is as hard as stone, seemingly forged from fossilized sugarcane and widow's tears. Your jaw emits a dry crack like bones breaking in a winter forest. Your rotten tooth lets out a squeal that echoes into your kidneys. But you don't stop. You can't stop. Because beneath that sun-baked tire tread is a layer of syrupy honey. And you've reached it. Sweet. So sweet it feels like your bloodstream is turning to syrup. Sweet like you just licked sin. Each chew is a miniature symphony in which your trigeminal nerve performs a solo in an unpredictable, electrified rhythm, and you realize you're eating a candy, and being punished for it, simultaneously. After swallowing, you sit still, clutching your jaw, eyes distant, mind wandering to a meadow where teeth float freely through the air. You think, was it worth it? Immediately, Greta hands you another. This one is rounder, maybe melted by the heat, maybe just shaped by indifference. You eat it again. Why? You don't know. Maybe you're a fool. Maybe sweetness is the only thing that drowns out every other taste life has left you. Maybe, in that moment, between the toothache and the neural bliss, you feel alive. And then it happens. The inevitable. The rotten tooth splits, clean in two. You feel it. Not pain, closure. A warm, honey-laced, medically relevant end. You spit it out. Not the candy, but the tooth. It rests in your palm, small, yellowed, exhausted, like a warrior who's fought too long. You sigh, not out of sorrow, out of relief. You finish the candy, then you lick your fingers. Then you bow your head to Greta. not in words, but with the gaze of someone who's completed a pilgrimage of the mouth. She nods, then turns away, like a sorceress who's completed her ritual. You leave the market with one less tooth, one piece of candy, and something sweet. Not fake, not filled with regret, just pure sweetness, lasting exactly as long as it takes for a tooth to die. You enter the tavern like an old soldier returning from the front. Not because you've been fighting, but because you've just walked across 3 fields of mud, past 2 unfriendly dogs, and through a group of children playing throw rocks at strangers and pretend to be orphans. The door creaks like your knees. The air inside is as thick as an old blanket soaked in lard, and the smell, oh, the smell could be an epic, with separate chapters dedicated to tobacco smoke, stale ale, armpits, and fried shallots that died last week. You find a table that isn't too wet and shows no clear signs of someone having passed out and vomited on it. That's the highest standard you can hope for. You sit down, the wood groans, your butt gets damp. But that's fine. You're not here to sit. You're here for snacks. A term that, in this setting, means gambling your stomach on a lottery of hot grease and unidentified ingredients. The server arrives, says nothing, doesn't look at you. Just stands there like a mobile monument to disappointment. You ask, "Got anything to eat?" He raises a hand, not to take money, but to point at the menu board, scrawled in charcoal, tilted awkwardly, with letters shaped like a child forced to write with their feet mid-fainting. The menu lists a few things like fish cakes, possibly fish, sausages, possibly meat, fried dough, possibly dough. Surprise item, definitely a surprise. You choose fish cakes. Not because you like fish, but because it's the only item without an exclamation mark, implying the writer wasn't too excited or alarmed about it, which you interpret as a neutral sign. The fish cake arrives on a wooden plate cracked like a map, slightly burnt on one side, with a mysterious hair attached. You decide not to ask. It's hot, which is good. But that also means the grease inside is still active, ready to launch at your chin like a vengeful missile. You take a bite. Soft. Outside. Hard. Inside. First taste, flour. Second, fish. Third, ginger? No. Maybe bone. Maybe a memory. But there's a distinct flavor. Like if you've ever licked an old silver spoon used to stir cement, you'll understand. Naturally, no one in the tavern looks at you like what you're doing is odd. Because here, odd is the default. The man next to you is eating something both dripping and steaming, yet appears calm, as if gently sucking on an ice cube. An old woman in the corner is sipping something from a jar. You suspect pickled cabbage, or pork brain, or both, while a young man gnaws on a leg. Definitely animal, you want to believe. You order again. Sausage. The server nods, doesn't ask what kind, doesn't ask if you can pay. He simply vanishes into the shadows behind the counter, where the sound of boiling oil and bronchial coughing compose the soundtrack to an imminent explosion. The sausage arrives in a tiny skillet, still sizzling, accompanied by a piece of bread of indeterminate original color. The smell is intense, not the kind that stirs hunger, but the kind that reminds you of a public bathhouse on a hot day. You bite, then chew, then pause, not because it's bad, but because you need to process. Each piece of sausage is a chapter in a meaty saga, telling the journey from not yet meat to forced into some sort of intestine, then cooked, then fried, then forgotten for a regrettably long time. Possibly pork, possibly horse, possibly something else. But you know one thing, it was alive, and maybe still is. You sip beer to wash it down. Mistake. The beer isn't for washing. The beer is for testing courage. It's warm, sour, foamy. And when you catch a whiff that reminds you of damp socks drying above a fire, you understand. This is part of the experience, not a malfunction. That's how medieval pubs are. No lighting, no glossy menus, no customer service. But there's something raw and real here. These dishes, questionable, intimidating, occasionally mournful, carry the soul of their maker, and often a small piece of their fingernail or hair. And in the thick air of yeast and grease, between wheezy laughter and knives tapping wood, you realize you're living a rare moment, eating accepting and almost smiling. You leave the tavern deep into the night, belly heavy, spirit light, head buzzing, and teeth covered in something best not identified. And you think, tomorrow, I won't eat here again. Then you smile, a small, greasy, melancholic smile, because you know you will. You're sitting in this dark, not to meditate or practice magic, but because the last candle just went out with a mocking pfft, leaving the room in a gentle haze of hopeless evening. And then, as if following some twisted law of physics, when light disappears, the rustling begins. The familiar sound of a creature which, in the Middle Ages, you didn't call by name, but by sigh. Rat. They don't live with you. They live within you, inside your sleep, your grain stores, your coat hanging by the door, and your vague thoughts whenever something scuttles across the wooden floor at 3 in the morning. Rats are sadness with teeth, ghosts with tails, the last thing you want to see, and the first thing you start to consider eating when the turnips run out. You didn't mean to eat a rat. Nobody starts with rats. They're not on any culture's menu by choice. Rats show up when everything else is gone. Bread, cheese, even dreams of apples. And in that darkest moment, you look at the rat. It looks at you. And there's a silent understanding. Like two stranded souls in a desert, realizing they have only each other left to eat. So you make a plan. Not a heroic hunting plan, but something sneaky, damp, and slightly pitiful. You set a trap. Not a spring-loaded steel kind, just a moldy piece of cheese, a bit of string, and an upside-down bowl. Classic technique. Simple, shameful. Next morning, there it is. A rat, small, scruffy, eyes wide as if wondering why its life ended over a dubious cheese offering. You look at it. It looks at you. And in that gaze you feel everything. Guilt, hunger, and a flicker of gratitude. For today, there's meat. Cleaning a rat isn't a widespread skill, but it's fast. You scrape the fur. No need for finesse. No one expects roast rat to be beautifully presented. You gut it. You breathe through your mouth. You try not to think. Then you skewer it on a stick, light a fire, and let the flames do what your reasoning can't. Grilled rat. The smell of meat fills the air. Not bad, really. Actually, not bad at all. It smells like disappointed chicken, or a rabbit that's seen too much. The fat drips onto the coals with a sizzle, a sound somewhere between scolding and approval. All right, I'm done. You lift the stick. The rat smokes gently. Its eyes are still open, a technical detail you decide not to fix. You bite. Crispy skin. Little meat, lots of bone. The taste, odd. Not bad, not good, not definable. Like drinking herbal tea from a shaman who said, "Just try it, you'll understand." You chew thoroughly. Maybe too thoroughly. Because rat bones are small and like to flirt with your throat. You eat it all. Not out of wastefulness, but because you don't want to see its eyes again. And when you lick your fingers, not for flavor, but because the smoke dried your lips, you suddenly realize you've crossed a line. Not the line between man and beast, but between I'd never and I just did. And the most surprising thing, you don't feel ashamed. You feel full. And in the Middle Ages, fullness is salvation. You've heard of rat roasted in vinegar sauce, a noble dish, served at dark feasts where people eat while discussing war strategies and punishments for parsley theft. But you don't need sauce, you need survival. And you just survived another day. Thanks to a rat. Some might call you barbaric. Some might cry for this poor innocent creature. Some might scoff and say, "Rat? Big deal." But only you, the one sitting beside a pile of cooling coals, dry rat bones near a rock stool, belly warm and heart a little numb. Only you understand this odd truth. Sometimes the foulest things carry a strange tenderness. Because that rat, though a rat, did what many won't. It shared. It gave you a meal, a reason to stand back up. A chance to smile, faintly, even if it's a throat smile, because your mouth is still full of tiny bones. You gaze at the ashes, listen to the wind and think, tomorrow, maybe I won't have to eat another rat. Then you glance to the corner, where another one is watching you quietly, cautiously. You nod gently. not today. You're standing in the middle of the festival market, where the songs of slightly drunk villagers rise like a chorus of uncles who just poured wine into their shoes by mistake, where a donkey decorated with red ribbons looks like it's about to attend a royal ball, and where everyone, in a collective effort worthy of respect, is pretending that the smell of horse manure doesn't actually exist. And you, beneath a sun that's not gentle, on a road that's not dust-free, with a hunger that's entirely unforgiving, see something that makes your heart beat like the drums of a public execution: skewered meat. The skewers lean precariously over a bed of charcoal, smoking suspiciously, the fat dripping onto the ashes like the misunderstood tears of a cow. Each skewer is a declaration of grilled intent, curved, scorched, and occasionally still furry. But you don't care. You've eaten turnips for 3 days straight, and now anything that's not a turnip is worth considering, even if it once lived on a diet of regret. You approach the stall. The vendor is an old man with a beard like mountaintop fog, wild, gray, and seemingly full of secrets, standing behind a coal pit like a sorcerer guarding the gates of hell. He doesn't greet you. He doesn't shout to sell. He just flips the meat slowly, as though contemplating your personal sins. You ask, voice raspy from hunger and skepticism, "What kind of meat is it?" He squints at you and replies, "Meat. Edible." A reply as short as fate. Not beef, not chicken, not some creature that once knew how to swim, just meat. And you, a person who once ate rat without flinching, know that asking more only makes things harder to swallow. You buy a skewer. It's hot. It's heavy. It's soft on one end and firm in the middle, like a relationship that never got clarified. You bring it to your mouth, close your eyes, and bite. The outer layer is lightly crisped, the inside oddly sweet. Not the sweetness of honey, but the kind of sweetness that suggests liver, intestines, or other things you should not analyze right now. It tastes of smoke, salt, maybe dried grass. On the third bite, you hit something crunchy but not dissolvable. Possibly cartilage, possibly a tooth. You swallow. You don't ask. Because truth is a luxury, and meat is reality. You remember the rumors, how during festivals they slaughter anything they catch, and sometimes creatures with fur, 4 legs, and a squeak are renamed earth hen, mountain bird, or composite meat. Some claim to find a toenail in their skewer. Others coughed up a ring. And some ate for 5 years straight, never asked, lived happily, and never questioned whether they'd just eaten a local legend. You finish the skewer, not because it's good, but because of faith. A kind of faith that isn't bright or poetic. It's the kind of faith you summon when entering an outhouse with no door. The belief that somehow everything will be okay. You order another. This one is softer, more fragrant, but has a grayish color, like the emotional state of a monk in existential crisis. You bite, and the meat is sweet. Lamb, perhaps? No. Goose? No. You stop thinking. Because in the Middle Ages, the best dishes are the ones you don't trace back to their origins. Some say it's rabbit, some say sparrow, some swear they saw the butcher dragging a sack. That twitched. But by the time it's served, no one talks. Because hunger speaks louder, and the tongue is the most forgiving organ of all. You eat. You're full. You glance at the vendor. His eyes still carry a sadness, like he too once ate this and never fully recovered. You nod. He nods back, a wordless empathy. An invisible handshake between two people who've accepted the simple truth. Sometimes, what you're eating isn't meat. It's the hope of eating meat. And as you walk away from the stall, holding a bare wooden skewer, smoke clinging to your lips, mind slightly hollowed out, you realize you've learned something valuable. Not about food, not about biology, but about trust. Trust in meat, trust in the man who grilled it, trust in your own survival post-meal. And you smile. A faint, smoky, slightly sore-throated smile, but a real one. After surviving a series of meals where food played the role of the villain in a Grimm's fairy tale, pretending to be harmless before unexpectedly dragging you into digestive hell, you begin to harbor a small, innocent desire. A bit of dessert. Just something soft, gentle, that might let you close your eyes and temporarily forget all the things you've chewed through, from raw turnips tasting of regret to roasted rats with grateful eyes. You think of cake, just a small piece, sweet and warm, with a hint of cinnamon, like a sweet hug from an imaginary friend who has a baking certificate and doesn't cook with used oil. And then you remember, you're living in the 14th century, and you're poor. In this era, the concept of dessert isn't a reward. It's an invitation into the cul-de-sac of expectations. It's the fall from this peak of dreams to the stone floor of reality, where what is called cake often isn't cake, and what is called sweet is often a historically significant lie. Yet, a glimmer of hope arises. You hear that Mrs. Ethel, a woman who is both a baker and a living legend, will make black pudding, a legendary dessert in the village, appearing only once a month, on damp days, when the wind is foul, or when she has a toothache, Mrs. Ethel lives at the end of the village, in a wooden house with an ethically questionable number of cats, and every time she steps into the market, the wind seems to change direction to avoid the scent of incense mixed with damp flour and something resembling melted remorse. She isn't friendly, she doesn't greet anyone. She doesn't bake for money, but for some mysterious reason that likely involves an ancient pact between her and a minor forest deity. You find your way to her house. You don't knock, you just open the door. Because her door is always ajar. Because the hinges no longer work, and because Mrs. Ethel doesn't believe in privacy. Inside, it's dark. Only the light from an oil lamp allows you to see three things: flour, a pot, and a smoking black mass. "Pudding," she says, as if reading an indictment. You swallow, not out of hunger, but because your mouth is dry from tension. On the table is a cake, if it can be called that, pitch black like a sleepless night, dense like faith in unpaid wages, and emitting an indeterminate smell between cheap wine and wet coal. You're invited to sit, not with words. Mrs. Ethel merely nods toward a three-legged chair, tilted as if ready to tell ghost stories. You sit. She cuts the cake. Not with a knife, but with something resembling a coal scoop. The cake doesn't separate into slices, but rather emotions. Mushy on the outside, hard on the inside, and sticky in all the places you don't want to touch. You pick up a fork, bring it to your mouth. Bite. First comes the taste of smoke. Not the pleasant kind like grilled meat, but the kind reminiscent of a wool sock smoldering in a brick kiln. Next is the taste of raisins, or at least something that once was a grape, before being stripped of its dignity by a 3-day baking process. Then comes the middle layer, soft like distorted childhood memories, tasting of honey mixed with wine, interspersed with something salty, like the tears of someone who once tried to bake and gave up. You chew, slowly, as if trying to understand life through the cake's texture. There are seeds, there are lumps. There's something slightly crunchy that you don't dare question. At one point you have to pause to breathe, then continue, as if climbing a spiritual hill. And you think, this is the only dessert that has ever made you feel the need to confess. Sweet cake, Mrs. Ethel says, pouring you a glass of water. Not to soothe the taste, but to help the cake go down. You don't ask for the recipe, not out of politeness, but because you know that if you knew, you'd lose a part of your soul that you're still trying to preserve after eating a rat last week. But you feel something very real, very serious. This cake isn't for fun, not for sharing. It's a ritual, a rite marking maturity in medieval culinary life. From the naive believer in sugar to the realist who eats fat and calls it pudding. You finish it. She doesn't smile. Neither do you. Both of you know, this will never be mentioned again. You leave Mrs. Ethel's house, stomach full, heart quiet, mouth sticky, and head hazy like after a spice-laden prayer session. You look up at the sky. It's not blue, just gray, like the pudding's color. You smile, not out of joy, but because you know, if you can survive this dish, you can survive anything. And you think, next time, maybe you'll try eating a lump of dirt. At least it doesn't pretend to be cake. The night has descended quietly and persistently, like a forgotten promise from an ex-lover. Cold mist begins to seep through the warped wooden walls, resembling the crooked teeth of an ancient ancestor. You, who should be asleep, lie there with open eyes, an empty stomach, and a mind trying to convince you that eating something at this hour is a reasonable, humane, and certainly not a mistaken idea. You try to ignore it. You curl up under a blanket that smells of kitchen smoke mixed with old well water and the scent of an unbathed person. A smell that's hard to define but potent enough to cure any desire to live. But your stomach doesn't listen. It starts to converse, not with cute gurgles, but with sounds akin to someone dragging a wooden chair across a stone floor, long, groaning, and mentally threatening. You think, no, I don't need to eat. I've had dinner. A stale piece of bread, something resembling cheese, and a cup of water of uncertain origin. I'm fine. But then, that thought is extinguished by an unexpected memory. A piece of fried onion cake from the tavern, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, and so oily it could replace a lamp. That image appears like a remorseful ghost, inviting, whispering in your ear with the voice of a grease-choked angel. Go on. Get up. Maybe there's something in the kitchen corner. And so you rise. There's no light. Only the faint moonlight filtering through the window, making everything in your house, the chair, the bucket, the shadows, look like they're plotting. You fumble your way to the kitchen corner. No refrigerator, no plastic containers, nothing capable of preserving food except the night temperature and the belief that bacteria also need sleep. You lift the pot lid. The smell rises like a gentle slap, not the kind that wakes you up, but the kind that makes you wonder, did I just get insulted by a smell? Inside the pot is something that used to be soup, now pale gray, slightly congealed, and silent as if it too wants to be left alone. You scoop a spoonful, not too thick, not too thin, the ideal texture if you've lost all standards. You taste it, warm, salty, slightly sour, not sure if it's from the vegetables, time, or life itself. But you don't grimace. Because this is when you don't need deliciousness. You just need something to fill the void between your soul and stomach without causing immediate death. You continue searching. Under the burlap cloth hanging on the wall is a basket that once held bread, or used to. Inside is a piece of something as dry as the concept of friendship among nobles. You break it. The sound resembles a knee joint cracking, and crumbs scatter like the dust of time. You dip it into the remaining soup. Eat. Can't chew, so you suck on it. To soften. To forget. And then you discover a treasure. An egg. Small. Dirty. Slightly moldy at one end but still intact. You look at it as you would an ex-lover returning after learning meditation. You don't ask much. You take it outside. Light a fire. Place the egg on a hot stone. Wait. Faith is everything. When the egg starts to sweat and roll like a nervous dancer, you pick it up, peel it gently, and, without fanfare, bite into it. The white is slightly rubbery, the yolk sticky like last winter's memories. But it's an egg. At 2 a.m. in the 14th century. That's enough to make you feel like you're living a life with depth. You sit by the dwindling fire, holding a spoon of cold soup, head resting against the wall, the flickering flames reflecting on the tired but content face of someone who has just experienced a midnight meal that shouldn't have happened, and precisely because of that, it holds meaning. Midnight snacks, in modern times, are indulgences. A pack of noodles, a slice of pizza, a spoonful of ice cream. Here, it's resistance. A statement that you're not defeated by stone-hard bread and smelly eggs. You still eat. You're still full. You still listen to your stomach's movements like a wind instrument choir. And you smile. A light, grayish, warm smile. Just like the color of the night. You crawl back to bed, not because you're tired, but because your legs are numb from squatting too long. Pull the smoky blanket over you, curl up in a corner like a remorseful cat, and close your eyes. Your stomach is no longer empty, but not full either. It exists. Like a silent supporting character, always present, not complaining much, just occasionally reminding you, yeah, I'm here, don't forget. And you sleep, not deeply, but enough to dream. And in your dream, Perhaps you see onion cakes, fish cakes, and a sad mouse sitting by the ashes, offering you the best piece of meat. At some point in life, often when you're sitting alone by a cold fire, scratching your head with a wooden spoon and wondering if black pudding is the reason you see the world more sourly, you realize that among all the bizarre, dangerous, or mildly illegal dishes, there's one thing that's always present, always lurking, always waiting for your moment of weakness to step into your life with the nonchalance of an uninvited neighbor who shows up at every feast: the turnip. Not the cute, pinkish red kind you see in fairy tale illustrations with mice, cats, and an old man rolling up his sleeves, but the real turnip, the kind that grows anywhere, survives under any conditions, and possesses patience that transcends time. Turnips don't bloom, don't change color, don't disappear. They just exist. They sprout. They fall. They roll around in the cellar. And they appear in your meals as if they were destiny peeled. At first, you're even glad, because it's food. And in a world where eggs are mystical, cheese is a joke, and meat is a memory, a tangible, recognizable turnip that doesn't run away and doesn't resist is a rare form of stability. You pick it up, you peel it, you cook it, you eat it, and you realize, perhaps you've just eaten something without smell, without taste, without soul. Turnips, whether boiled, steamed, roasted, fried, mashed, stewed, or even just sniffed, retain their neutral quality. They're neither delicious nor terrible. They just exist, like a sleepy homeroom teacher at an opening ceremony, or an uncle sitting silently at the corner of a funeral table, just eating without speaking. You've tried everything. You add salt, no change. You add fat, it gets tougher. You stew it with onions, garlic, fragrant herbs, non-fragrant herbs, herbs once trampled by dogs. None of it makes the turnip lose its core characteristic: indifference. Turnips don't absorb seasoning. Turnips resist the concept of delicious. Turnips embody culinary numbness to an almost philosophical degree. Once you tried making turnip soup. The recipe is simple. Take a turnip, cut it, drop it into boiling water, wait 5 hours, and then serve it to someone you never want to see again. You eat it. It's not salty, not sweet, not spicy, not fragrant, but it feels like you're consuming emptiness, a physical void, a punctuation mark on reality. After eating, you find yourself quieter, and you begin to understand why monks often eat turnips: to renounce desire. You've tried stir-frying turnips, thinly sliced, sautéed onions, added oil, a dash of something resembling fish sauce, but no one dares confirm. The aroma rises. You think, aha. But when you take the first bite, that feeling dissipates like sea foam hitting rocks. The outside is lightly crispy. The inside, still turnip, still bland, still woody. Still like chewing on the summary of a melancholic philosophical essay. Turnips are the only food that makes you feel you don't need to eat more. Yet you continue, because there's nothing else. They embody resignation. They symbolize prolonged winters, unseasoned stews, the stark truth that life doesn't always offer fried onion cakes. You've dreamed of living in a place without turnips. You eat soft bread, fresh meat, even fruit. You smile in your dream. Then you wake up. Beside you, on the table, is a turnip, round, pale, silent. You look at it. It looks at you. And between you two there's no affection, only a bitter truth. It will always be there. Turnips don't attack you like rats. Don't give you toothaches like candy. Don't trap your taste buds like black pudding. Turnips slowly gnaw at you with their persistent presence, daily, bit by bit, as if they're testing your will to survive. And you, strangely, begin to get used to it. You start to accept it, like someone who's been in the dark so long they start to find it comforting. Once, you met an old man in the village who had survived 3 failed harvests, a mild pandemic, and 2 marriages. He said, "I've been eating turnips since before I could read, and now I still eat them, because nothing lasts forever except turnips." You don't know if he was telling the truth or just trying to make you sad, but you nod, because he's right. When everything else disappears, when bread runs out, rats hide, Cheese gets stolen by cats, meat gets pilfered. Turnips remain, lying still, unchanged. And in that constancy, there's something comforting. Not delicious, but present. Not special, but persistent. Not joyful, but familiar. Turnips, like your life, are not perfect, not pleasant, but they continue to exist, despite everything. You look at the turnip once more. Peel it, cut it, put it in the pot, light the fire. Not because you like it, but because you know, tomorrow, you'll still need it. You knew someone in the village was rich, not because they wore silk, not because they had all their teeth, and not even because they didn't have to line up for well water, but because every time they opened their kitchen door, there was a smell. Not the scent of burnt coal, not the aroma of despair-laced gruel, but the smell of bacon, the fragrance of fat, salt, fire, and privilege. It was the kind of smell that made passers-by stop and sniff the air like bloodhounds catching the scent of buried dreams. It was the kind of smell that made your stomach riot in protest. It made you wonder whether you were surviving, or just existing in a world that didn't smell like this. Bacon wasn't something you had eaten. It was something you imagined other people ate. It appeared in the tales of those who had once worked in noble kitchens. It was something you saw through frosted windows in winter, when smoke curled from chimneys you were never allowed near. It was something you watched with longing, your hands gripping the wooden window frame, your gaze dreamy like a maiden staring at a prince on horseback. Except in this case, the prince was meat. You once asked, "How do you get it?" And the answer was a soft, deep chuckle, origin unknown, echoing from afar, like the laugh of a hungry ghost on a winter's night, followed by a pitying pat on the shoulder. You need a pig, and power. Because in the Middle Ages, you didn't own pigs, you just raised them for someone else. Pigs weren't pets, they were walking investments. They weren't loved, they were weighed. And if you had pork, you didn't eat it, you sold it, unless you were insane, or rich. The wealthy didn't eat bacon because they were hungry, they ate it because they could. Every slice was a social statement. I have the power to extract fat from a living creature, preserve it with smoke, and consume it slowly. Meanwhile, you, whose meals made more noise than flavor, couldn't even imagine what eating slowly meant. Because if you didn't eat fast, the rats would beat you to it. Then one day you were invited to the landlord's house. Not because he liked you, but because someone needed to clean chicken droppings from the backyard. You finished the job. Sweat, mud, smell. You wiped your hands on your pants, a ceremonial act, and were about to sneak off when the housekeeper called out. "Come in, have a bite." You walked into the kitchen like entering a cathedral. Silent, reverent, with the fragile hope that you'd get to eat something that hadn't already been claimed by maggots. On the table, there was bacon, real, hot, fragrant. Not the meat cooked in your ash pit back home, but a glistening ribbon of fat, curling like the sarcastic smile of destiny. It lay on a wooden plate, next to fresh-baked bread, resembling a satirical cartoon of paradise. You were given a piece, small, thin, no wider than 2 fingers pressed together. But to you, it was a miracle worthy of being wrapped in paper and stored in your heart. You bit in, the fat melted, the salt soaked in. Smoke rose like incense, filling your nose, your brain, even the locked drawers of old memories. The slice was small, but the psychological impact was immense. You felt heard, respected, alive. You chewed slowly, knowing this was it. There would be no second piece. You didn't ask. You didn't breathe too hard. You were only allowed to remember. You left the kitchen without speaking. You weren't full, but you were filled. With shame. With craving. With a newfound understanding of the universe's unfairness. And then, under a starless sky, where the moon peeked through a grove of barren trees, you made a vow. That one day, you would have bacon. Every week. At least once. Maybe even twice. You started saving. Hoarding fat. collecting dry leaves for smoking. You listened to stories, asked a coal merchant, traded half a shoe for a recipe missing its final step. You tried. You failed. The first time, the meat burned. The second, it stayed raw. The third, the entire stove caught fire. But you didn't give up, because in your mind, the smell still lingered. And then, one day, you succeeded. A dry strip of fat. Not pretty, not even, not salty enough. But when you bit in, it melted slowly, leaving behind the taste of smoke, of effort, of 4 years of persistence that no one had ever patted you on the back for. You sat and ate, alone by the fire. No one watched, no one admired you, but you smiled. Because for the first time in your life, you smelled rich. You know you're at the bottom of the food chain when sweet is not a taste, but a vague concept, somewhere between dream and folklore. Something you've heard about, imagined, occasionally smelled from a distance, but never actually held, let alone eaten. And if there's one thing in this brutal world that's capable of carrying all your hope, temptation, and emotional vulnerability, it's honey. Honey. Not the kind squeezed from a bear-shaped plastic bottle. Not the kind labeled organic with mountain meadow imagery, but the kind your ancestors once revered as liquid gold, made by the forced labor of thousands of winged, sting-ready insects and stored in damp, moldy hollows that only the reckless or mentally unstable willingly reached into. You saw real honey once, at the wedding of the village tax collector's son, drizzled in drops as small as tears over a piece of white bread. Yes, white bread. The kind commoners only ever saw in embroidery or fever dreams. The guests held their breath, as if witnessing a sacred ritual. The honey pourer lifted their hand like a priest raising the chalice. And as the drop touched the bread, an old man quietly wiped his eyes. You weren't sure if it was from emotion, or from remembering the last time he truly ate cost him a finger to a hive. Because to get honey, you don't go to the market, you don't ask your neighbor, you hunt. More specifically, you track bees, tiny creatures, winged and armed, capable of defending their property more fiercely than a baron whose chair's been stolen. Bees don't make honey for you, they make it to survive. And if you take their honey, you are stealing life itself, an act so bold even the gods hesitate to endorse it aloud. But you go anyway, with a burlap sack, a pole, a face mask made from old trousers, and an unspoken prayer. You follow bees, a task requiring the patience of a philosopher and the stubbornness of a depressed tree. You watch them rise into the sky, swoop over fields, and vanish behind a hollow tree. Your heart pounds, your hands sweat. And your brain, rather than reminding you about the risks of stings, falls, or being humiliated by ants, thinks only of honey. You approach the hive, not with wisdom, but instinct. The stick in your hand is the only thing between you and collective biological punishment. You tap lightly. The bees come out. You run. The stick falls. The hive cracks. A bit of honey drips out. And in that brief moment between two stings, you reach in, feeling that sticky, warm liquid, faintly fragrant, sweet like an unspoken memory. You shove the honey into a rag, run faster than you ever thought possible, screaming, "No regrets," as if that might earn the bees' forgiveness. Back home, you wrap your hand with leaves, wash your face with cold water, and place the honey-stained cloth on the table like a treasure snatched from a dragon. Small, messy, but glorious. You unfold it. The honey glistens. Not much, maybe a spoonful, maybe less. But you know, it's a spoonful of freedom. You scoop it, bring it to your mouth, and bite. Not into the honey, but into a piece of dry bread you saved for 3 days. A loaf so hard it could be used as a weapon. But today, with honey, it becomes the background music for the sweetest symphony of your life. The taste spreads, soft, deep, sticky like an old flame but without the sting. In that moment you feel loved, and then you finish it. In silence, not out of regret but because you know, this is a meal that won't be repeated. Honey is not like other foods. It doesn't fill you up. It doesn't replace dinner. It's not on the peasant menu. It's proof that something refined, sweet, and beautiful exists in the world. But to reach it, you have to risk your life, run screaming, and possibly sacrifice your face. After eating, You sit still for a long time, staring out the window where dusk had already passed. You don't know if you'll have food tomorrow. You don't know if that hive has been abandoned or if it's currently plotting its revenge beside your bed. But you know, somewhere deep in your throat, between your teeth and tongue, there's still a faint trace of sweetness, and it feels enough. You smile softly, a smile dusted with honey. Light, silent, faint, like the sound of bees drifting into the night. You used to think the word feast sounded cheerful, something festive, exciting, accompanied by music, white tablecloths, and steaming plates overflowing with meat, vegetables, and hope. Then you lived in the Middle Ages, and you realized feasting here was more like a public funeral for culinary dreams, complete with pies and politely averted gazes. This year's village feast was held in the church courtyard, the only place large enough for a crowd and sacred enough to prevent loud arguments. Long tables were assembled from the remains of a collapsed chicken coop, covered with burlap that used to be corn sacks. There weren't enough seats, so half the people stood, half sat, and everyone wore the expression of someone attending a 3-hour parent-teacher conference. You were invited, not out of affection, but because every household had to contribute a dish. And you, with nothing but a few turnips and a pot of boiled water that looked like reheated tears, arrived with the fragile hope of eating something that wasn't gray. On the table were the village's delicacies. In other words, the scraps left after a winter too long and a summer too short. There was onion pie, which you suspected was all onion. Some kind of meat stew, with at least 3 types of bones from different species, and a large pan of porridge, or more precisely, a greasy liquid with the texture of rice water that once dreamed of being important. And then there were sausages. Long, dark, tied at both ends with twine, and smelling like they had just returned from a war where hygiene lost. Everyone looked at them. No one dared go first. Then an old man, whether brave or just numb, cut a slice, raised it to his mouth, chewed slowly, swallowed even slower. He looked up, contemplative, and said nothing, just kept eating. And so, the feast began. People passed dishes. People laughed. Not out of joy, but because crying would have been worse. People ate, each in their own style. Some chewed like interrogators. Some slurped like they were confronting the truth. Some just scooped and stared, hoping the food would reveal its intentions through appearance. You started with the pie. It was hard. The filling was possibly onion, or parchment. You bit in. Your teeth hit something with the consistency of a well-hidden secret. You chewed. You didn't breathe. You swallowed, and you thought, only 83 more bites to fill the void. You tried the porridge. Warm. Thick. It tasted like salt. Or sweat. You weren't sure. But it slid down your throat with the smoothness of a well-rehearsed lie. You felt alive. Not joyful, but alive. Then someone brought out the special dish. A huge pot containing something resembling soup, steaming and revealing fragments of limbs. Not human, but not entirely from a legally edible animal either. Someone whispered, "Maybe big bird feet." Someone else said, "No, looks like root vegetables." You didn't ask, because at a village feast, questions are the fastest path to nausea. You tasted it, because you were already seated, and because refusal earned you the look of enemy of community morale. The soup, or protein-rich liquid, tasted enthusiastic. It tasted like effort, like a combination not approved by science. But you swallowed, and you felt warm, possibly feverish. It was fine. As you tried to process what just passed through your throat, a child ran by and dropped a plate. It shattered. Everyone paused for 3 seconds, then continued. No one said a word, because everyone knew that might have been the highlight of the event. Then came the cake, a large one, decorated with seeds, leaves, and a white powder that might once have been flour. Everyone looked, everyone hoped, and everyone fell into the eternal trap of village cake. It looked promising, but was really a tightly compressed brick of dough. No sugar, no butter, no reason. You sliced. The cake crumbled like unfired clay. You bit. Your gums sighed. It tasted like a badly told story, long, dry, and going nowhere. But people still ate, because it was cake, and because here, eating was a group affirmation that we were still alive. The feast ended as the sky darkened. People stood. No one was full, but everyone said that was nice, as if that was the only socially acceptable thing to say. You left the table. Your stomach wasn't empty, but it wasn't full either. It felt like a drawer full of undelivered letters, vague, jumbled, and mildly haunting. You went home, your hands still sticky with porridge, your heart holding the strange sensation of someone who had just experienced something not good, not bad, but real. There are days when you open the pot and it's empty. Not the kind of empty that means we're out of rice, but the kind of empty that resembles a brain that's just forgotten its own mother's name. Calm, absolute, and a little bit insulting. No bread, no porridge, no turnips, no eggs, no meat, no rats, no hope. And when your stomach starts to groan like a wooden chair under emotional distress, it's time to look out the window and start thinking about leaves. Leaves. Those botanical life forms you used to step on, lie on, burn to repel mosquitoes, or sweep away without a second thought, now appear before you as a potential menu glistening with promise. You stare at the grass outside like it's a buffet opening for early service. And deep down, while you know this won't end well, you also know that hunger is the worst negotiator in existence. You head to the garden. No knife, no basket. Just 2 hands and a biologically indifferent attitude. You crouch. You pick. You look at the leaves as if selecting an outfit for a wedding. Not too old, not too young, no fuzz, no bugs. You've learned a few hard lessons since the time you ate mistletoe and spent 3 hours talking to an ant. The first leaf you try is wild amaranth. It looks soft, has a lovely green color, and grows in abundance. A clear sign that no one else has been desperate enough to pick it. You bring it home, rinse it briefly, because well water is now more valuable than kindness. Then blanch it, which means tossing it in the pot and sitting there until you forget what you were cooking. When the amaranth is done, or has disintegrated, you scoop it into a bowl and look at it like a cloud that's been ground up in a mortar. It has no distinct smell. Its texture resembles soap foam that's done something unspeakable. You taste it. The first flavor is water. The second, leaf. The third, memories of water and leaf. No salt, no oil, no reason to repeat. But you swallow anyway, because it slides down your throat like a barely acceptable promise. Next, you try raspberry leaves. You once saw them in a medicine book, described as aiding digestion, diuretic, cooling. Sounds helpful, especially when you no longer digest anything and your body temperature is perpetually suspicious. You pick them, boil them, and make a sort of porridge. The result is a moss-green liquid, lightly steaming, and smelling like someone once washed their feet in grassy water. You eat. Then you're not sure you're still yourself. Each spoonful makes you forget what joy used to feel like. Every sip is a gentle reminder that nature did not design itself for your culinary convenience. You start feeling chills. Not from toxins, but from the realization that you're eating something even cows would politely decline. But then, you happen to meet an old woman in the village, the kind who's eaten enough leaves to write a brief history of diarrhea within a 10-mile radius. She nods, pulls you close, and whispers, "A good leaf is one that doesn't make you dream of dead people." You don't ask more, you just listen. And she points you to one, wild perilla, a purplish-gray leaf, gently fragrant, growing low to the ground, and, miraculously, tastes like someone, somewhere, still cares. You try it, you pick it, you cook it, and yes, it doesn't send you into a trance. It has flavor, it has scent, and most importantly, it feels safe. You eat 3 bowls, not full, but enough to feel like you've consumed something real, something your liver won't report to your kidneys. And you feel grateful. Grateful for the leaf, for the old woman, and for yourself, for not having eaten the wrong leaf. Because once, just once, you saw a village fool eat the wrong one, Gelsemium. And they say when he woke up, he could only remember one thing, the smell of dirt, from very close up. Since then, you've learned to respect plants, not because they're your friends, but because they're neurological risks in leafy form. Every leaf is a gamble, and you, with a stomach that roars like a death knell, are a gambler staking your life and digestive future. So each time you eat a leaf and don't have to call the local shaman, you smile, lightly, not joyfully, but thankfully. And you know, in a world of uncertainty, a handful of non-lethal leaves is already a feast. Chapter 19. The End of a Hungry Day, where dreams of cake gently die. The end of a hungry day, where dreams of cake gently die. Night had long since fallen. Not gently, like silk slipping over a noblewoman's shoulders as she read poetry by the fire, but more like a damp burlap sack dropped on the head of someone who dozed off, fast, heavy, and unforgiving. You lay there, in a straw-roofed corner of the house, your head resting on a bundle of old cloth, body wrapped in a blanket that smelled like time and poor decisions. And you thought, another day has passed, and I still haven't had cake. Cake, what you once considered a food, has become more of a concept, a symbol, a tender whisper from the universe that sweeter things exist than watery porridge and sausages covered in questionable fur. But like faith in the kindness of cats or the phrase, next season will be bountiful, cake is something you've never actually seen with your own eyes. You close your eyes. They're too tired to stay open. But your mind isn't. It still runs in circles, like a lost goat in the village square, searching for some way, some small miracle that might allow you to make a cake tomorrow. Not a fancy cake. Just something with flour, a shape, and a name that doesn't require the word unfortunately. You try to imagine a round loaf, soft, its surface cracked from lack of yeast but still radiating quiet confidence. You cut into it, your hands not covered in straw dust, no cracking sound from crusts hard as cobblestones. And inside, it's warm, fragrant, and smooth like the memory of a rainless day. Then you imagine adding a few drops of honey, just a few, and sprinkling some wild seeds on top, the kind you once thought were poisonous but turned out to be just unpleasant. You place the slice on your palm, raise it to your lips, and you cough. Not from emotion. From reality, a dry cough, like a crumb of life lodged in your throat, reminding you that you're lying on cold ground with an empty stomach, and the only cake you have is the one your imagination is holding up against the weight of the real world. You open your eyes, only to find the ceiling is still the ceiling. Same cobwebs, same leak, same spider considering an expansion project. You roll over. Straw jabs your ribs like a gentle reminder that every position is wrong without a mattress. You pull the blanket up, not because it's warmer, but because it gives you the illusion that you're doing something useful. You wonder, if it rains tomorrow, what will you eat? If it's sunny, what will you eat? If the weather makes no decision and just hangs there like a vague emotional backdrop, what will you eat? And you know the answer. Turnips. Maybe thin porridge. If lucky, a handful of wild perilla. And if luckier still, a mouse that voluntarily expired in your oldest trap. You sigh. Not from sadness, but because breathing is the last free thing you have. Outside, the night makes itself known. The sound of insects like a soundtrack written in rusty metal. The wind whispering through gaps in the wall, and someone coughing in the distance for reasons unknown. Illness, emotion, or choking on something they probably shouldn't have eaten. You hear it all. And you feel nothing unusual, because here, night is never silent. It just doesn't raise its voice. You think about the cake again. One last time. This version has no honey. Just flour and good intentions. Then you smile faintly. Not because it's funny, but because there's something deeply ridiculous about living in a world where even dreaming of cake has to be rationed. But still, you dream. Because if you don't dream of cake, what else is there to dream about? Turnips, hollow soup, sausages with legs? No. You choose cake. Not sweet, not buttery, not real, but at least it won't give you indigestion. And you close your eyes again. Truly this time. Not to think, but to sleep. Because tomorrow will come. And with it, Another chance to chew on something that may or may not qualify as food. You know you won't have cake in the morning, but you might have sunlight. You might have wind. You might find a perilla leaf no one's picked yet. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a small apple that fell from a tree someone forgot to guard. And that will be enough to keep going. Not enough to be full, but enough not to stop. Night has fallen again, not like the velvet curtains of noble poetry, but more like an old sheep wool rug tossed over your shoulders by a cranky aunt who makes beds with the smell of boiled turnips, heavy, musty, and slightly damp. You lie there, in the straw-roofed hut, head resting on a bundle of fabric that has long given up trying to be soft, wrapped in a blanket that smells like time and poor decisions, and you think, another day gone, and still no cake. Cake, once a food, now a concept, a symbol, a gentle whisper from the universe that there are things sweeter than watery porridge and less hairy than village sausages. But like trust in the kindness of cats or the old promise of a better harvest next season, cake is something you've never actually seen with your own eyes. You close your eyes, not from sleepiness, but because there's no longer a reason to keep them open. Your mind still wanders, like a confused goat pacing the temple yard, wondering if there's some way, some tiny miracle that tomorrow you could make cake. Not a luxurious one. Just something with flour, a shape, and a name that doesn't come with the word tragically. You imagine it. A round loaf, soft with a cracked top from the lack of yeast but still radiating inner confidence. You slice it open, your hands clean, no straw dust, no sound like breaking roof tiles, and the inside is warm, fragrant, tender like the memory of a day without rain. Then you imagine adding honey, just a few drops, and maybe some wild seeds on top, the kind you once feared were poisonous but turned out to be merely hard to chew. You place the slice in your hand, bring it to your lips, and you cough. Not from joy, from reality. A dry cough like a crumb of life stuck in your throat, reminding you that you're lying on cold dirt, stomach empty, and the only cake you have is the one your imagination is desperately defending against the truth. You open your eyes to see the same ceiling, the same spider web, same leak, same spider considering an annex. You shift. Straw pokes into your side like a soft-spoken reminder that every position is wrong without a mattress. You pull up the blanket, not because it helps, but because it feels like doing something useful. You wonder, if it rains tomorrow, what will you eat? If it's sunny, what will you eat? If the weather decides nothing at all and just looms like a background mood, what will you eat? And you already know the answer: turnips, maybe thin soup, if lucky, a handful of wild perilla, if blessed by fate, a mouse that died quietly in the oldest trap. You sigh, not out of despair, but because breathing is still free. Outside, the night speaks. Crickets chitter like a soundtrack etched in rusted metal. The wind slips through the wall cracks, and someone is coughing somewhere. Maybe from illness, maybe from emotion, maybe from eating something that should not have been eaten. You hear it all, and feel fine, because here the night isn't silent, it just doesn't shout. You think of the cake once more, this time without honey, just flour and sincerity. You smile faintly, not because it's funny, but because there's something quietly absurd about living in a world where even dreaming of cake has to be done with moderation. But still, you dream. Because if you don't dream of cake, what else is there? Turnips? Soup that apologizes for existing? Sausages with legs? No. You choose cake. Not sweet, not buttery, not real. But at least it won't give you food poisoning. And you close your eyes for real this time. Not to think, but to sleep. Because tomorrow will come, and with it, another chance to nibble something that may or may not be classified as food. You know you won't have cake in the morning, but maybe, just maybe, you'll have sunlight, maybe a breeze, maybe a wild perilla leaf no one's picked yet. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find a small apple that fell from a tree someone forgot to guard. And that will be enough to keep going. Not enough to be full, but enough not to stop. You dream. You dream of a loaf of bread, soft, golden, warm. You dream of cheese without mold. You dream of meat without having to ask, from which species? And you dream of eating without having to consider morality, theology, or the crunchiness of bones. But the dream fades, like smoke, like cake dissolving on the tongue, like laughter from far away, a place with no salt, but someone who shared their last turnip with you without asking for anything back. And now, as you've followed us through every imagined slice of cake, every questionable piece of meat, every tear-stained drop of honey, and every silent stare at a shriveled turnip, allow yourself to relax. Let the sounds in your mind slow down, soften, and fade away like the last warmth clinging to a cold pot. We didn't get to eat the cake, but we told stories, we laughed, we breathed, and we survived another day in history. A day where food wasn't meant to be enjoyed, but simply to exist alongside ourselves. You've stayed with me all the way to the end, and that, as you know, is a kind of victory. Thank you for listening, for not walking away when I mentioned turnips for the 12th time, and for understanding that sometimes chuckling at hunger is the only way to keep going. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, not so I can be famous, but so the algorithm knows you have a precious sense of humor and a stomach that's been through more than it should. Leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from, what time it is, and whether you're hungry. And now, dim the lights. Place a soft breeze by your pillow, and let's drift into the night, slowly, like a real cake should. Unhurried, unmoldy, unforgettable.